Hey guys, it's me, Yaya Diamond, and I'm back. I am back. I am so very excited to have my next guest on the show. What she doesn't know is that this book right here, Along Came Hell, I think or so I thought, I think this is like revolutionary right here. Because there's a lot of people going through a lot of things, and they don't realize that there are a lot of people out there going the same, not exact, but similar. And Along Came Hell, or so I thought, is really revolutionary to me because I went through some hell, or so I thought. And I want to get my author out, and her name is Lois Young. I want to thank you so much for coming and gracing our
Mhm.
show with your presence because this is just an amazing book. So, first of all, let's go back a little bit. Let's get some history about you and where you
Okay.
started to understand that hell was actually encroaching upon you.
Well, it was back in 2018. Well, actually, it was before that when I got suspicious that my husband might be somewhat inappropriate with his granddaughters, but I could never find any proof of it. So I lived with suspicions for quite a few years until I was sort of sneaking around when he was outside with the girls or wherever, and I never saw any evidence that anything was happening. But then it all came out in the open, and it had been happening. And so that's when hell descended, and we had a fantastic family life, and we were involved in our church and in ministry, prison ministry, and completely unexpected. And they felt you were kicked to the curb. And what happens now? Where do I go? What do we do? What about the kids? What about the grandkids? It was just my world fell apart.
I am so sorry. I am so
I
sorry.
was
I
too.
mean, because and like you said, you had suspicions
Mhm.
with and I don't need, like, everybody has a relation, like everybody has like this story that you
Mhm.
bring up when you bring this story up. And I have my
Yes.
story too, but my story didn't get past that night because I went and told my mom, and she tried to kill him. All I heard was, "Evelyn, stop! Put the knife down!" And things crashing and breaking, and the next thing you know, pack
Oh,
your bags, we're moving. And that was it. That was it.
wow.
Um, he was, wow, that must have been devastating. What was it? I mean, I know looking back at it now, it's okay. It's you can deal with it better. I know it never really resolves itself, but you could deal with it better. But in
Mhm.
that moment, when you were sure that you knew for a fact that this is exactly what was going on, what were the emotions that you felt? Because I know my mom wanted to kill him.
Well, that was sort of interesting because I have never been very emotional. And part of that probably goes up to the way I was raised as a child. Because if I was pouty as a teenager, my dad would say, just knock it off, go back to your room until you can come out with a smile on your face.
Mm.
And I loved my dad, and I learned well just to keep the emotions hidden. So that's what I did that night when I finally learned, because my kids had found out about it and they confronted their dad, and he admitted. And a counselor I went to said that never happens. First, the child quite often is not believed,
Right.
and then if they approach the perpetrator, they deny it, and that's not what happened. So
Mm.
my son called at the house one night, and he just lives a couple miles from me. And he said, Mom, could you have Dad come over for a few minutes? And I said, sure. So my husband went over, and he was back in about half an hour. And he said, all the kids are coming over. We have something to discuss. And at that moment, I just had this feeling that, okay, we're going to find out the truth now. And I said, all of them? Because our oldest son lives 2 hours away from us. But
Mm-hmm.
my other son and daughter live just a couple of miles. So they came over. We're all sitting around in the living room. And our oldest son looks at his dad, who was sitting on the fireplace hearth, and he says, Dad, I think you have something you need to tell us. And my husband looked at us and said, I've been inappropriately touching the granddaughters. And I had two sensations. I wouldn't say emotions. I just got hot all over, and I also got cold all over. It was just interesting, the physical reaction I had.
Mm.
And, and then the amazing thing, my oldest son, who confronted his dad, no, had asked his dad to share what was going on. My son's wife said, "That doesn't tell us anything." And he said, "Well, I don't have to get explicit, do I?" And she said, "No, but let me tell you what it is like to be that little girl." And my son knew that his wife had been molested, and I knew it. But the other two kids hadn't, and I have three children, and they're all married. But the other kids did not know. So she sat there and told it was like lying in bed as a little girl and hearing footsteps coming down the hall and wondering who it was going to be and what was going to happen. And she said, and I would pretend like I was asleep and I'd make my mind go somewhere else. And she kept that a secret for years. But that night she shared that. And after everybody left, my husband just said, "What have I done?" And that began the journey. As far as emotionally, looking at him sitting on the fireplace, we were in our 60s at the time, and he was balding and had a gray in his beard, and I thought, oh, he's getting older. And then I looked down at my hands and saw, yep, I've got old hands now, and I had some white hair on my sleeve. Yep, I'm old too. And that was the only thing I felt other than just this intense heat and then freezing cold.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And then my my youngest son sitting next to me got up that night and pointed his finger at his dad and he said, "You have destroyed my daughter." And he left the house. He said he had a meeting to go to, but we found out later he just had to get out of the house. He knew about the boys had found out about it earlier in the week. In fact, I might as well share that now. My daughter had suspicions at the end too, and so my husband came back from town with her little girl Annie with him and parked in the garage, and they didn't come in right away. And my daughter said something's going on. So when Annie came in, my daughter said, "Okay, we're going home." And so they walked in their house, and my daughter picked Annie up and put her on the kitchen counter and asked her if her papa was touching her in ways he shouldn't. And she told me, the look in my mom's eyes, I knew it was serious and I had to tell the truth. And I said yes. And so my daughter called her brother, who was just a few miles away, who also had a daughter, and they talked to her. And she said no at first. But later, when she found out that her cousin had said yes, she said, "But that was supposed to be our secret."
Mm.
And at this point, I knew nothing about it. So my younger son called his older brother, who drove down the 2 hours down here. And the next day, they confronted their dad and spent a couple of days with him, walking with him, talking to him. Did he have other victims? Had he been unfaithful? Had he been involved in pornography? And then finally, they called the family meeting. And up till that point, my daughter did not know my husband had confessed.
Mm.
So anyway, it was one of the things you never expect.
No. And so the relationship after that, what was it like for you? I mean, what happened?
Okay, well, we went to bed that night, and my husband told me he had to be up early in the morning. He was a state officer in a national Christian men's group, and he was a state officer, and he had to go down to California for a meeting. So he told me he was leaving early in the morning. But I laid there in bed that night, and all these thoughts going through my head of why didn't I see it? What didn't I know? Why didn't I report it? But I had nothing to report, and the tears started coming, and which surprised me because I very seldom cry. And
Mm.
just all these negative thoughts, and I felt like I was caught in a tsunami, just being carried out to sea because I didn't know what to do. What do I tell people? He was the president of our congregation, and
Mm.
I had been on staff for quite a few years at the church. We had both retired, and he was this is shocking for a lot of people. He was a director of the Department of Child Services locally, and so he oversaw
Hey,
all the
wait, stop.
investigations of.
You're
Oh
kidding me.
yes, no, no, I'm not. And so he was well known in the community. And I thought, now what? People know me, people know him, and he's going to prison. And how am I going to deal with that? Where do I go? What do I do? I don't want to go shopping because I'll run into people I know. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And when it finally hit the newspapers, people thought, oh, it must be somebody else by that same name. They knew it wasn't him. So it was a period of I've got to run away. I've got to hide. I quit going to church. I didn't answer my phone. I um, I cried a lot, and I found myself wandering around in an alien, commonplace world. Um, but the thing was so interesting in this yaya is that night I was lying there and I thought, okay, I've got to get past all this negative because we were involved in prison ministry. And I knew stories coming out of prison that a guy who's in there for child abuse, has a target on his back. So I had pictures of him being attacked in prison or whatever, that it wasn't going to end well. But then I started thinking of all the positives that had happened, that I had thought prison ministry was my calling for service, and
Mm-hmm.
that was gone now. But I said, no, I thought I was involved. Prison ministry was my thing, but I bet it was a boot camp for training for us of what it is like to be in prison. What happens there? What kind of ministries are there? What do the offenders need?
Mm,
Um, and so all that's going through my head is maybe prison ministry as my mission was my idea and not the Lord's. Because I completely lost, I could no longer go in because they said, you and your husband went in as a married couple. And with some of the offenders, they might see his offense as you too. And you would be in danger coming in
mm.
once it hits the newspapers, and it hit big. Um, so that was gone, and I'm smashed flat. I thought, no, I came to understand that that was part of my shape, but he wasn't done with me yet.
Wow. I
But
have
it
to
was a
ask
long,
you. I don't want the
yes,
book to be, divulged. And
no,
this has got wow. What
I'm
about
open to,
forgiveness? Oh, I
yeah.
understand. What about forgiveness? And are you together today?
We finally were divorced. I talked to pastors about it, and well, I'll tell you the reason I finally brought it up because I wasn't sure what to do. Because you say, for richer or poorest, and the good and the bad. But this is the worst. I never expected this.
No.
But my son said when my husband got out, he was sentenced to 10 years to life, and he was going to get out in 10 years. Well, he was out, and he was my oldest son who lived up close to where he was because he was in uh, a place for men out of prison up in where close to where my son lived. Um, my son realized his dad was trying to get credit cards, and he wasn't always a good manager of money. And
Mm-hmm.
so my son said, Mom, if he gets a credit card and starts spending and he has no income other than Social Security, you're going to be responsible.
Yeah.
And he said, I think you're going to have to seriously think about divorce. So I talked to the pastor, and he had lots of good things to say. I did have grounds. I mean, he hadn't committed adultery, but he did not love me as Christ loves the church. He
No.
had lied to me because a couple times I told him my suspicions, and he would say, I thought you knew me better than that. And well,
Mm.
yeah, I thought I did. But and so, and I said, well, and if we did decide to continue, we'd have to go back to ground zero all over again, dating or whatever. And he said, when you have been married over 40 years, there is no ground zero. And sometimes a house has to be torn completely down before
Mm-hmm.
it can be rebuilt. And so then that and talking with my son, then we sat down and my son and I and figured out the financial situation because I had been dealing with all of that, trying to live on his retirement. And when you're in prison, you do not get Social Security. And so that was cut. So it's
Mm.
living on limited income. We had some savings, but then there's the lawyer fees and the lie detector guy and the psychologist. All these fees were taking our savings. So anyway, I met with my husband and told him what I wanted and showed him what I had on paper. I love spreadsheets, so it was all on a spreadsheet, and he agreed. He agreed to it, and so we are divorced. But you mentioned forgiveness, and that's I talked with a pastor that my financial advisor advised, and about forgiveness, and he said when we are forgiven, God no longer sees our sin. It's it's done with. As far as the east is from the west, He forgives it. It's gone. And for us to forgive, we have to say we forgive, and we have to reach the point where when we see that person, we do not see the sin. We do not see the offense. We see them as a child of God. And what I learned is it's a process like peeling an onion, because I would pray and I would forgive him and I would be okay. And then there'd be an article in the newspaper about somebody who had molested a child.
Mm.
All those feelings would come back.
Yeah.
And okay, there's still layers I have to peel off. And it took a long, long time to reach the point where I no longer see him as a child molester. He's been through a lot, which we can go into later. But he has asked for forgiveness. He realizes what he did was wrong. But there's so many things I learned from my own pastor because he had done a lot of work with other pastors on developing curriculum for so men's groups could use it, men involved in pornography or sex crimes.
Right.
And he said one is that they are usually an only child of older parents. And so they have no brothers and sisters or close playmates, which was the case for my husband. His parents were in their 40s when he was born. They lived on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a half brother who was in high school when he was born. And his parents' friends were all older. And the ones, his cousins, were all, he thought they were aunts and uncles. So
Mm.
he had no kids around. And he said there is something about people they need to play.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not unusual for older men, especially when they retire and they don't have that job identity of who they are. They
Right.
have their grandkids. And so that was one. And the other one is quite often they have been molested themselves. And
Mm.
my husband had been. He didn't know who it was. It was, he said he wasn't a neighbor. He didn't think it might have been one of his older cousins. And whoever the boy was had a deck of cards with nude women on them. And that's how it got started.
My
But
God.
he only talked about it once, but that, and he never really told anybody. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't pay any attention to it because it was early in our marriage and I didn't pay attention to it and I didn't know that it affects people a long time.
Yeah.
So that's, he had two of the things that are very common in, especially older men that molest. Yeah.
My gosh. That. Oh. Oh. I have. How would I say? Um. The person that actually did this to me has passed away already. He was old.
Hmm.
Um. And so when I saw that he was still doing it, and I saw the rap sheet, I think it was 2000, early 2000s. We found his mugshot online. He was still doing it. And I called the police
Hmm.
station. I said, I will testify against him if I have to,
Yeah.
because he needs to stop. And not too long ago, not too long after that, I'm sorry, he passed away. And I said, well, that's for the best. At least nobody else will. And it was of natural
Yeah.
causes. I was like, it's for the best. At least no one else will get, harmed, and we can move on with our lives and heal.
Yeah.
But I think that because of what I saw and what my mom did, I would probably react the same.
Uh-huh.
I gotta put the
So
knife down.
I had those thoughts when I was during those early months. Is well, not so much that I would kill him, although I thought, would I be up to it? But if
Oh
maybe in prison or when he's out, maybe he'll get. He was a jaywalker. If the sign said "Don't walk," I obey signs. If it says "Don't walk," I don't walk, even though there's not a car for blocks.
God.
For him, if it says "Don't walk" and there's no cars coming, well, he'd walk.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I thought, well, maybe he'll get hit by a car, or maybe when he's driving home from this meeting he went to, he'll drive into a tree, or maybe he'll just keep going until he goes out of the country. Um, Maybe he'll be gone, but because I
Wow.
didn't want him around, and but it took a month or so before he was ever arrested. Oh, and one thing that's sort of interesting, he called me when he came back on his way home from that meeting he had to go to in California the first day. And he said, I've decided what I have to do. I'm calling our pastor and letting him know that I have to step down as president of a congregation and why. He resigned from the organization he was in. And he says, I'll turn myself in at the sheriff's office. And he did stop at the sheriff's office, but it was late at night, and they said, we'll come back tomorrow. Um, and so he did. He went in and told them what was going on, and they said, well, we can't arrest you until you give us documentation. We can't just do it on your word. So he stayed in a motel. He moved out of the house and moved into a motel.
Mm.
and and it took 2 months of investigation because he was involved with kids, and our granddaughters had friends that
No.
but he did not molest any. Only the two of the three granddaughters. Now the oldest granddaughter, it's interesting. She was a very is very strong-willed, and if she doesn't like it, she tells you about it. And my husband was holding her one day, and he patted her on the stomach, and she said, "Stop it! I don't like it." He never touched her again.
Mm.
But the other two are just really sweet little girls that just want to keep everybody happy.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah,
I,
but it's
that's crazy. So you divorced. Um,
yes.
hell, or so you thought, is kind of behind you now. Um, what is it that you feel now that everything is kind of resolved and that's gone and you're no longer with him? I know you don't want him around, but forgiveness, but over there. That's how I feel. Like you're
Yeah,
forgiven, but just
I
stay
still
over
see him on occasion. My
there. Yeah.
son that lives up by him, for my husband's birthday, they have a barbecue, and all the kids, the whole family comes. Of course, none of the grandkids can come. The victims can't come, and none of the grandkids come. But we all get together, and he still has a sense of humor. He is still funny. Um, but he went through something that was interesting in this healing process. Is he was close to being released, and they were trying to get us to bring him home, and I did not want him home, because then I would have to keep my eye on him, I figured. But I got a call. Oh, it was probably just maybe a month before his release date, that he was found unconscious on the floor of where he worked, and he was bleeding from his head, and he had to be taken to a hospital.
Oh
Well, he
wow.
ended up being taken to one of the big cities around here for a fractured skull. And the whole family got to go see him, which was unusual because usually inmates do not get visitors. But since he could die from it, the families can come and say their goodbyes. So
Hmm.
we all were up there for a day and a half, and he reached the point where he knew his name, and he knew what day it was, and so then we could no longer go in because he was not close to dying. He was
Hmm.
fine. But even in that experience, my oldest son kept the family together. How are we feeling? How are we doing? Um,
Right.
and we were up there sitting around, and we hadn't gone in to see him yet. And so my son said, "So how are we doing?" And his wife, the one who had been molested, said, "I'm just excited about this." And I thought, "What?" And she said, "Well, we have been praying." We said, "Satan would love to use this to destroy a family. And we have been praying that God can use it for good.
Mm.
And so I'm excited to see how he's going to use this." And that just, amazed me.
That is amazing.
And then
I would not have
a
come.
few days,
I'm sorry. I couldn't do it. I mean, you know, being I don't know. I mean, everybody's different though, right? There is that
we
you
are.
have your different personalities, you have your different
Yeah,
expectations as a person, and people can get over certain things, but I don't
yeah.
think I could.
Well, my daughter-in-law, that her daughter was one of the victims. The night that we all got together, when we knew his release date was coming up, my son called us together, and he says, "Now, how are we feeling about him getting out? Because the prison's wondering, is there a place here, or what do we want? How are we feeling?" Well, my daughter-in-law was sitting right next to him. This was the one that was not molested, and she said, "I'm excited about it. He has served his time well, and I miss him." And I thought, what? And I had forgotten that between where we live and they live is a river goes by, and my husband loved to walk, and so did my daughter-in-law. So if she
Mm.
was going out for a walk, she'd give him a call, and she said, "Hey, I'm going to walk. Do you want to go walk with me?" So they'd go and they'd walk along the river. It's a paved trail, and they'd talk and laugh and joke, and she had missed that. But here she is, a mother of one of the victims, and she has the point that she said, "I'm excited for him." And I'm going, "Well, I don't want him here."
Yeah. Hmm.
So then it was after that he fell and hit his head. Then we found out that we're not responsible for finding a place for him since the accident happened at the prison. The prison was responsible for that, and they were responsible for all the medical care. Well, he spent several weeks in the hospital and all the stuff, finding, for the brain bleed and the fractured skull, and we that was out of our hands, and they had to find a place for him. It was not our responsibility.
That's good though. That's
Yeah.
financially that's good. Well, my goodness. So what would be your advice? I mean, you've gone through a lot, and this
Mhm.
is a lot for you and a lot for your grandchildren, and then the emotional roller coaster, and then the time served, and then the divorce, and then the feelings
Yeah.
and everything. It's all in the book, right? But what kind of advice do you give to people that may be going through something similar? Because unfortunately, things like this happen every day.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read the last sentence in my book, if I may,
Yes, definitely.
because we don't understand. We never know exactly what's happening, or what the Lord's plan is. I said, even though we now see through a veil darkly, a veil of earthly ideals, thoughts, and concerns, one day on the other side we will see clearly. In the meantime, we need to stop shedding tears over what was, celebrate what is, look forward to what is to come, and live obediently in our day to day.
Wow.
And that is, and part of that I think comes with age, is every day, this day is never going to be here again.
Right.
It's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what tomorrow holds. And so what is for today? And if I spend all my time thinking about all the terrible stuff that happened, I, and I
Yeah.
don't think about, and I sort of forget about the celebration, things I can celebrate. It's I just need to focus on today is the day, and the Lord's working in it, and
Right.
good things happen. And and there's stuff I learned during this journey that I thought, why in the world am I doing this? And I found out later, it was revealed to me. In fact, I'm always questioning, and I know we're running out of time here. I'm always questioning things. Why don't I understand? I can't do this. I can't. Why did God allow this to happen? And one day, my grandson, who's now pushing 30, was over. He was about 6, 7 years old, and he said, "Nana, do you know why God made dinosaurs?" And I said, "No. Do you?" And he said, "Yep." So I said, "Well, tell me." So he goes through the whole creation story, and then he got into naming every animal he knew, every fish, everything, the plants, the dandelions, the roses. And then he said, and then he went to make Adam and Eve, and Nana, there was no room for houses. There were all these plants and all these animals. So he made dinosaurs. And then he became Tyrannosaurus Rex, tearing up plants and tearing down trees so God could build houses. And the Lord brought that to mind way back when I'm trying to figure out why this accident? Is he going to die? Is he not going to die? What's happening? I don't understand. And I thought, here's my grandson at 6'7", using what he knew at that time to figure out what God was doing. Now here I am. At that point, I am in my 70s, and I'm trying to use this 70-year-old mind to figure out why God's doing what He's doing. And I don't need to know. And when it gets to the point I need to know, He'll reveal it to me. And that's what has happened. But I spent all this time trying to figure out. Yeah.
Wow.
And the other thing, dealing with being alone. Don't have trouble being lonely, but alone was entirely different. And so my son had built a house, and he had 3 kids, and the boy shared a bedroom, and my granddaughter had her own room all to herself. And she was just a little gal, about 4. And I said, was it scary in that big room all by yourself? And she laughed at me and she said, Nana, my dad was just down the hall. And that was just what I needed at that point, just to remind me I am not alone.
That's right. That's right. You're
Yeah,
not.
so I'm not alone. And the Lord is working, and I have no idea. One thing that has come out of this is I started a group for women at our church called the Golden Girls, because a lot of us, when we get to a certain age, we don't drive at night.
Right.
But a lot of activities for women are evening events, because women work or they have kids, and they need somewhere to watch the kids. And so we started this group, and Golden Girls, of the Lord's not done with us yet.
Right.
So we started writing thank you notes to ushers and people on the worship team and all the different volunteers, Sunday school teachers. And then we started sharing our testimonies, and it was amazing how many of those women had been molested, how many of them had been abused. And we discovered so much about our own walk in our faith. It drew us closer together. And now I've had a speaker in today from a group in town that ministers to the homeless and helping them get back on their feet, going through this program of people who are using their abilities to minister, even though they have been through tough times themselves. You can't live in it. You can't live in your past.
No,
Otherwise, it'll destroy you.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
wow. Miss Young, thank you so much for sharing that. Your book has so many different amazing awards and winning, and so I congratulate you on that. But
Thank
I
you.
see why. I see why. You say that you're not very good with emotions, but that book tells me a different story.
Yeah.
And it
Do
does.
we have to? Can I share just one more quote?
Yes, definitely.
This
Go
is from
right
my
ahead.
This is from one of my granddaughters, and she sent a text to me while I was in church after she had talked to me. And she says, I want people who are going through the same thing I was to remember they are valued and loved by Jesus. It isn't their fault that all this stuff happened to them. I just want to encourage people to continue running after Jesus, because even if your life is confusing and hard after having any kind of trauma like that, you can come out of it, and you have a Father in heaven who has saved a place for you. You are not broken. You are not forgotten. You are loved. And that's from one of his victims. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow. Well, Miss Young, thank you so much. And
You're
those
welcome.
children of yours and those grandchildren, they are strong.
They
Definitely
are
strong.
all of them.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yep.
yeah. Strength is
All
in
are.
them. And I'm happy that you are able to move on and live your life. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to do that after all of this and not blame yourself. Like, I should have seen it. I should have known. You know, it's hidden so well. And a lot of times you don't even think about it. It's like, oh, he loves them. You know, so yeah, but I admonish people to get this book if you're going through something. Along Came Hell, or So I Thought, by Lois Young, or Lois, is it Lois?
It's Lois, yes.
And by Lois Young is an amazing book that you can go ahead and pick up. The QR code is on that banner right there at the bottom, so you can go ahead and scan that if you like, or you can go ahead and go to the link in the description box below so that you will be able to get to there and find it very easily. It's not only on Amazon, I'm sure it's on many other places, like Barnes and
Yeah.
Noble, right?
Yeah, it's on Barnes and Noble. Yeah.
There you
I'm
go.
sure there's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, Lois, thank you so much.
Yeah. So a quick thing, the granddaughter that wrote that last part, she said, if you had never married him, I would not be here and I
Amen.
would not have the family that I have. And I thank God for that.
Hmm.
That blew me away.
Yeah, she's right.
Yeah.
She is
Yeah,
right.
she was. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
anyway. Yeah,
Well,
well, thanks for being willing for the interview. I appreciate it. And I went out and I watched, I said, now who is she? So I watched your band on one of the things. I would say it's not my style of music, but I enjoyed watching it and listening to it.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, R&B, soul, funk, Aretha Franklin, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But
Lineback Elvis Presley was after I was out of high school. So,
oh,
well,
okay,
before
I
I
got
was in my high school years, it's Elvis Presley. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
anyway.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
so
So,
much for
thank you. I enjoyed
watching
it.
me. Oh my gosh, thank you. And I want you guys to please don't forget to dare to be different, but most of all, go ahead and check out this book for yourselves. This is one of those books that even if you haven't gone through something, you might find some clues in there. If you have any suspicions, please don't wait. Just bring it out. Like, this is my suspicion. Have a family meeting. Do whatever you got to do, because in the end, it's going to squash a lot of stuff and it's going to make things better. And this book just might help you. So you never know. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're
Lois, thank
welcome.
you again. And until next time, guys, don't forget to dare to be different. Bye.